Every carbon bike sold today claims to be engineered, tested, and built to survive a professional peloton, and most of them genuinely are. A small number over the years have failed that test badly enough to trigger a formal recall, not a forum complaint, not a rumor, an actual manufacturer-issued, safety agency-logged recall with a serial number range attached. Those 4 are worth knowing before buying anything similar secondhand. Then there are 5 carbon frames that have earned the opposite reputation: years of pro-level racing, strong resale value, and no structural recall history at all sitting behind them. Buying carbon secondhand without checking either list is one of the more avoidable mistakes in this entire category, since recall records are public and take minutes to check against a frame's serial number. Both lists here also span roughly the same 20-year window, which makes the comparison a genuinely fair one, not a case of picking recent failures against decades-old successes. Here's both lists: worst first, best afterward. Worst, number 4, the Cervelo R2.5, model year 2005 specifically. Cervelo voluntarily recalled a limited run of these frames after identifying a potential issue with the down tube separating from the head tube on certain units, a lug bonding problem that the standard frame testing of the era simply wasn't designed to catch. The company discontinued the model outright and redesigned its lug bonding approach for everything that came afterward. If a 2005 R2.5 ever turns up secondhand, the serial number range tied to that recall is the very first thing worth checking before anything else about the bike. It's also, notably, the oldest recall on this list by nearly 2 decades, which says something about how rare a genuine structural recall actually is in this category. 4 confirmed cases spread out over roughly 20 years across the entire carbon bike industry. Worst, number 3, the Specialized Alley Elite, model year 2018. This particular model has an alloy frame rather than full carbon, but the composite fork attached to it was the subject of a formal recall after Specialized found the fork capable of breaking under normal use and creating a genuine crash hazard. It's a useful reminder that recall risk on a modern bike isn't only a frame conversation. A fork is just as structural as anything behind it, and just as capable of failing catastrophically. It's also worth remembering this wasn't Specialized's first fork-related action. The company issued a similar steerer tube recall on a different model years earlier, which suggests the issue sits somewhere in how composite forks were being sourced and tested industry-wide during that period, not something isolated to one factory run. Worst, number 2, Trek's 2021 and 2022 model year Emonda SLR and Speed Concept SLR bicycles, along with the Bontrager Aeolus RSL VRC handlebar and stem combination sold separately as an aftermarket part. Trek issued a voluntary recall after the one-piece carbon bar was found capable of cracking under load, and by the time the recall was announced, the company had already logged confirmed injury reports in both the United States and Canada, including a concussion and dental injury from one incident. Trek's response afterward, full replacement parts and free installation at any authorized retailer, is generally cited in the industry as one of the smoother examples of how a recall is supposed to be handled. And the fact that it covered an aftermarket part sold independently of the bike, not just bikes sold as a complete package, is part of why it's often used as a reference case for how broad a recall's scope should be. Worth noting here is what these 4 recalls have in common structurally. 3 of the 4 involve a one-piece carbon component under sustained load rather than the main frame triangle itself, the fork on the cube, and the Specialized, the integrated bar on the Trek. Manufacturers have been pushing forks, bars, and stems to be lighter and more aerodynamically integrated for years, and that integration is exactly where several of these failures originated. A single carbon part, now doing the structural job that 2 or 3 separate metal parts used to share between them. Worst, number 1, the Cube Agree C62, recalled far more recently than any of the others on this list. Cube identified a resin content issue in the front fork's brake mount area that could lead to internal delamination, and, in a worst-case scenario, complete failure of one side of the fork under hard braking. Cube's public language on this one was about as blunt as a manufacturer's statement gets. Stop riding the bike immediately and without exception until an authorized dealer has inspected the fork using the company's dedicated check tool, a level of directness that stood out even against the other recalls on this list. It's worth understanding how a recall like any of these four actually starts, because it's rarely a single dramatic failure. Manufacturers and safety agencies track incident reports, warranty claims, and field failures continuously, and a recall gets triggered once a pattern emerges across enough units to indicate a systemic issue rather than a one-off crash or user error. That's exactly what happened with Cube's Agree C62. A small number of reported cracks were enough to trigger a full engineering review of the resin process, well before the failure rate became common. It's also why a recall, counterintuitively, can be a sign a manufacturer's monitoring system is working, rather than a sign the brand is unreliable. A company with no recalls on record isn't necessarily a company with no problems. It may simply be a company that hasn't been tracking field failures closely enough to catch one yet. That's the worst list. 4 bikes tied to documented, verifiable recalls rather than rumor or internet speculation. Every one of them was addressed directly by the manufacturer, and none of them represent an ongoing risk today if the recall repair was actually completed. What they do represent is a reminder to check a specific frame's recall history before buying secondhand, because a resolved recall on a bike that's already been properly fixed is a genuinely different situation from one that was never brought in for the fix at all. And checking that history takes minutes against a serial number, not hours. Now the other side of the list, the 5 carbon frames that have built the opposite kind of reputation over roughly the same stretch of years. Best, number 5, the giant TCR Advanced SL. It's been raced at the World Tour level for well over a decade across multiple different team sponsorships, without a structural recall ever attached to its name. And it remains one of the more consistently well-regarded all-round race frames on the second-hand market for exactly that reason. A long track record with nothing dramatic in it. Giant also manufactures frames for a number of other bike brands in the same facilities used for its own TCR production, which means the quality control standard applied to the TCR is, in practice, the same standard applied across a meaningfully large share of the industry's carbon output. Best, number 4, the Canyon Ultimate CFR. Canyon's direct-to-consumer sales model cuts out the retail markup that normally funds a traditional dealer network, and the Ultimate CFR has built its reputation as one of the lightest production race frames sold anywhere in the world, without the kind of recall history that sometimes accompanies a manufacturer pushing frame weight down aggressively to hit a number. Buying direct also means Canyon carries more of the warranty and service relationship itself, rather than routing it through a dealer network, which has made owner reviews on long-term reliability unusually detailed and easy to find, compared to brands sold exclusively through third-party shops. Best, number 3, the Cannondale Super 6 Evo, now in its 4th full generation. It's one of the longest continuously refined race frame lineages still in active production today, and its reputation rests less on any single standout feature than on a track record of steady iteration, generation after generation, without a major structural failure ever attached to any version of it. Cannondale has also kept the Super 6 EVO in a relatively narrow, focused product role compared to some competitors. An all-round race frame rather than a platform stretched to cover aero, endurance, and race positioning all at once, which has arguably made it easier to refine well rather than compromise across too many jobs at once. Best, number 2, the Trek Madone. Trek's Aero flagship has been through several full structural redesigns since it was first introduced, and every one of those redesigns addressed weight or ride compliance rather than any safety concern. It remains one of the few genuinely aero race platforms that's raced by professional teams in essentially the same form it's sold to the public, rather than a watered-down public version of a hidden team-only bike. The most recent redesign notably removed a moving suspension component from an earlier generation, a small rear-end damper system, in favor of a simpler passive layup, a change that traded a small amount of complexity for a simpler, more field-serviceable design, and one with fewer moving parts that could eventually wear out or need replacement. Best, number 1, the specialized tarmac, currently in its SL8 generation. It's arguably the single most raced frame silhouette in the modern World Tour peloton, carried to Grand Tour wins across multiple team sponsorships and multiple frame generations in a row, and it holds some of the strongest resale value of any carbon frame on the second-hand market anywhere, which is probably the single clearest signal that both professional racers and everyday owners trust it completely. It's also been through enough successive generations, each one lighter, stiffer, or more aerodynamic than the last, that any design flaw serious enough to trigger a recall has had multiple opportunities to surface across an unusually large number of frames in the field, and none has. Put both lists side by side, and the real pattern isn't about carbon as a material succeeding or failing. It's about which manufacturers caught their own design problems early, and which pushed a frame or fork past what their own testing process was built to catch. The 5 best bikes on this list didn't get there by luck. They spent years being raced, crashed, and rebuilt in front of the harshest audience the sport has, and none of that history includes a recall notice with their name on it. That's also, in practice, the single most useful thing a buyer can check before purchasing any carbon bike secondhand, not the marketing copy on the manufacturer's site, but whether that specific frame or fork ever had a recall issued against it, and if so, whether the fix was actually completed. A resolved recall, documented and repaired, is a minor footnote. An unresolved one, on a bike still being sold quietly used with no mention of it, is the single biggest red flag in this entire category, and worth walking away from regardless of how good the rest of the listing looks. Thanks for watching. If you want more honest breakdowns of what's actually reliable in this industry, hit subscribe and stick around.